Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Team Needham Abode podcast studio, and we are super excited to have Brett Ender on our podcast today about talking about healing disease with meat. So as we wait for him to come on, I just want to say we met him in Hack Your Health. That's right. In Tampa. And we're super excited to have him on. He's got the Meat Mafia podcast along with one of his friends, and they've done over 150 episodes, I think. And he's going to be talking about healing his condition, which was ulcerative colitis with meat. And of course, as Jan and I are taught as pharmacists, we're taught that ulcerative colitis is a drug deficiency, and you can't absolutely fix it with diet. And there are literally, gastroenterologists that say that. And it's always perplexing to me that we can say that there's a gastrointestinal disease that diet doesn't affect. If you have a gastrointestinal disease, diet affects it, whether the doctor says it does or not. Janet, what are your comments?
Well, and this is really an important subject, I think, because our GI tract is very important to our overall health. If we don't have a good GI tract, we don't have a good immune system, we don't have neurotransmitters being made like they should be. So it affects more than just your GI tract. It affects your whole entire body. And that's why it's really kind of crazy to think that nutrition and food and diet doesn't affect how your outcome would be, or the fact that you can heal your body. It's just odd that we've came to that conclusion. And I think some of it probably started out when we started being more influenced by big pharma. We threw away the idea that our day-to-day activities really meant a lot, and that, the pharmaceutical industry was the answer, the pill, like our friend Robbie says, the pill for every ill, which is not empowering to people. I think that's one of the reasons that we like to do a podcast, is to give people tools so they can empower themselves in their life and make decisions for their own body, and to help their body heal and thrive. And the GI tract is super important. Like I touched on, your immune system, your mental and emotional health. It's super important. And to excuse one of the things that we do every day is impacting that is ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. I think it's like crazy. I don't know how you can pull those two things apart and don't think that they don't impact each other.
Well, in fact, for those of you that are watching on Facebook, check out my personal Facebook post from yesterday. And I challenged somebody with $100, anybody that could think of a disease that is not affected by diet, and I give them $100. And some of them, the answers surprised me. Many of them didn't. I mean, the biggest one that really surprised me was type 1 diabetes. There was at least 3 different people that says type 1 diabetes is not affected by diet. And that disease alone, diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, I can't think of another disease that is more affected by diet. Diabetes mellitus, per definition, is a carbohydrate metabolism problem, which means that, carbohydrates matter. What you eat matters. Some of the other diseases were genetic diseases. I'm trying to think. Huntington's disease was one of them. ALS was one of them. Everything is affected by what we eat. Isn't that right, Brett?
Yes, it is. How are you guys?
We're
Doing great.
well.
We're just telling a little bit about your story, your journey, about how you healed ulcerative colitis with by going carnivore. And we're just talking about how every disease, I did a Facebook post yesterday. There is not one disease out there that is not affected by diet, period. It's just not. I don't care what disease it is. Diet matters. So introduce yourself, you guys, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we're so pumped to be here. I'm Brett. This is my co-founder, Harry, and we are the co-hosts of the Meat Mafia podcast, which is a podcast we started in 2023, and then we're also the co-founders of Noble, which is a grass-fed beef protein supplement that we launched in April of 2023. And Shawn, I totally agree with what you're saying too. It's amazing how many conventional doctors are not talking to their patients about nutrition and dietary lifestyle measures. And I can certainly attest to that. Harry and I became friends because we played college baseball together up in Babson College in 2016. And my senior year, I got very sick with ulcerative colitis. So had a ton of inflammation in my colon, was going to the bathroom 30 times a day, lost 30 pounds in the hospital, and immediately was put on biologic drugs, oral steroids, Lialda, and was just told that, I was going to be on infusions for the rest of my life. And, really everything changed in 2019, just crossing paths with Shawn Baker, listening to him on the Joe Rogan podcast. I saw you guys, I know you guys are friends with Shawn as well. He's an amazing guy. It's amazing to think about how many people have probably healed themselves through his content. It's pretty humbling, but he started talking about other patients with UC, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, psoriasis that were curing these incurable things through the carnivore diet. And that was kind of the spark of inspiration around, hey, what if I myself could heal? And I was 25 at the time. I certainly did not want to have to be dependent on these infusions that I was getting every 8 weeks. And, for about 2 years, I followed that diet very strictly. And, within a few days of doing the diet, I noticed unbelievable benefits in regards to the inflammation of my stomach, my symptoms going to the bathroom, my skin health, energy, mood, you could pretty much call out the symptom. And I felt significantly better, and just did that for a significant period of time. Ended up putting that disease fully into remission. I got off all the drugs and medication I was taking in 2022 and really just have not looked back. So that was really the food is medicine moment for me. And, right after that time period, Harry and I just really felt compelled to share our learnings around the carnivore diet, the paleo diet, regenerative agriculture. Why is the food system so broken? And I think there's pretty simple answers to this stuff, even though it's a very complicated question, but it all stemmed with our own experiences, eating more animal products, getting the processed crap out of our diet, and just noticing how good we actually felt. So.
Well, it's almost, I don't know what adjective to use. It's almost comical that we have doctors, gastroenterologists, and I'm sure you dealt with a lot of them, Brett, that think diet doesn't matter when it comes to Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I mean, I would think a 12-year-old could figure that out.
100%. Yeah, when you think about the root cause and the inflammation and, your large intestine, your small intestine. And what's interesting is my GI, he's an amazing guy. My dad actually used to go to him as well. And I've heard of GIs that when people start to go carnivore, eating more meat, they immediately try and get their patient off of it. My doctor, to his credit, he was very encouraging of it. He just didn't really want to learn more, where I would go, I would do these 6 months checkups with him. I had to get a colonoscopy every 2 years. So every time I was going in, the inflammation was getting better and better. And I was in the best shape of my life. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, don't you want to learn a little bit more about the playbook, especially if I'm the first patient you've ever gotten off of biologic drugs? And it would be a cool conversation to have with him at some point in the future. But I'm assuming it's just a byproduct of the conditioning of his training. And obviously they're teaching things through a very square box. But yeah, it's pretty amazing to just think, like, imagine how many people could get off these drugs, how much money it could save the medical industry, just by incorporating nutritional levers that people could be pulling. Like, my infusions were $50,000 a pop. So I cost, my insurance, it was like a $2 million bill by the end of it. And luckily I had good insurance, but if I was still on those drugs, it would be a few more $1 million down the drain, and it all could have been prevented through diet and lifestyle. So.
But that's also part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
Seriously, they and the doctor, and I'm going to quote Shawn Baker here, because he's the one that said it, and I learned it from him, is, most doctors, they're drug dealers, they're not healers. And the power they have is the power of the prescription pad. And as pharmacists, we understand that. And some of them they want to brag about that. And they want to be arrogant about it. Fortunately, Shawn Baker, like very few doctors, is a humble guy. And I mean, although he saved millions, possibly millions of lives, he's a very humble guy. But most doctors are kind of arrogant and they like to brag about how they have prescriptive authority and how they know all about drug therapy. But that's really not healing somebody.
Yeah, maybe to piggyback off that too. I grew inspired to start talking about the quality of food and its impact on our health through looking back at some of my stories. So I got prescribed. I had very bad cystic acne when I was in high school and got prescribed to get on Accutane.
Mm-hmm.
And if I trace that back even further, when I was a kid, I was on a lot of antibiotics for ear infections. And what the through line that I kind of drew, which, take this with a grain of salt, was I think my diet in high school was centered around a higher percentage of processed foods. I was an athlete. I could basically eat whatever I wanted. I was constantly looking for food because I was growing and in the gym and building muscle. And so my diet wasn't great. I remember like the foods that I would eat at lunch were terrible. And I think through the prescriptions of the antibiotics, I had some distress with my gut microbiome. And so I think I was just much more highly susceptible to the inflammation that goes from your gut to your skin. And I just remember that period being so interesting because there was never a point with that conversation around improving the quality of my food or improving the quality of my diet. It was just like, here's a topical ointment. Here's like some other kind of different treatment. And then it ultimately led to Accutane, where I'm getting those blood draws every month. And, very, kind of grateful that's, there's more awareness around just like how I think that medicine is very powerful. And probably I wish I hadn't gone down that route, but I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I did. And, it's just, I think the quality of your food is, even for something that is not, necessarily as life or death with what Brett was dealing with. I still think there's just like so many of these instances where people are resorting to a pharmaceutical path as opposed to improving diet, just because I think it's, there's more control with the outcome that the doctors want that level of control, just so they can say, they're making progress on things. But I don't think we're really empowering people by going down that route.
No.
It is kind of an interesting thought, though, if we think just of basic biology. I mean, we need the proteins to build, and how do you build your body without them? I mean, it's kind of a basic biology, right? It's part of whether you're an animal or a human. We need these nutrients. And so it's like we lost our way and our path, and we keep going down this crazy black hole, and we just keep going further and further. And it's such a powerful money machine too. I mean, if you look at the pharmaceuticals that are coming out, like with the IVs and infusions, oh my goodness, the dollar behind that, it's very powerful. I mean, to pull that back in and say, oh, it's what you're doing, with your food, the incentive is really not there for the doctor, the insurance company, the pharmaceutical industry. So we're really kind of pushing against, a big mountain in some ways, right? But the cool thing is like Shawn and I have been following Shawn Bick for quite some time, and Healing Humanity and stories like yours, is that the time frame it takes for people to turn around and start feeling better is amazing.
Yes, I'm sure you've come across people that were, type 2 diabetic that finally started playing around with those nutritional inputs, and before they know it, they're getting off of the insulin that they're taking. Or
Right.
even I was saying earlier, Laura, literally within like 3 to 4 days of eating carnivore, I was starting to see a noticeable reduction in the symptoms that I was having, like that quickly. I know everyone is different, but you do hear so many stories of, within a few days, a few weeks, there is a noticeable improvement in whatever malady they were struggling with. And then finally, for me, it was really the first time of, okay, I basically eaten processed foods my entire life. I was a high level athlete, but I finally had that comparison of, okay, this was my baseline on processed foods, which was down here. Now, finally, after cooking my own meals and getting the proper nutrition, my mental health feels incredible. My physical health feels incredible. Like, it finally created that contrast where I realized I really don't want to go back after I've gotten a taste to this. And I think to your point, Laura, most people just haven't gotten to experience that contrast. They're just kind of in that gradual metabolic rut for decades, and they don't even know what it would feel like to get out of it. So they're just going to continue to do what they're doing.
Well, and so I guess I'm going to put you on the spot. So talking about the money that the medical industry makes. So when's the last time you went to the doctor, Brett?
That's a good question. It's probably been over 3 years. It might have been the last time I got the colonoscopy when I got off all the medication I was taking. Right.
And how about you, Harry?
Man, I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're on Accutane, if you're still on Accutane, you'd be going in at least every 3 months, maybe every month. Yes. And I mean, so think about how much money you guys have cost the medical system by healing your diseases. The medical system wants people to be sick. Those are just facts. Some people do not want to admit that. I know people, my colleagues, they don't want to admit it because they're in the middle of the system and they're kind of accessories to the crime. And it's really hard to admit that you're an accessory to the crime. So yes, but the fact of the matter is the system doesn't want people healed.
They don't.
Yeah.
So since we, are from the industry, the argument is always, if you are eating protein, then you must have a lot of fiber that you have to add in, right? Because how are you going to handle all this protein without fiber? So have you done that? Do you need to do that? I mean, how does that play out for both of you and your diets?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I guess my answer to that, Laura, is what I would say when
I don't want to. I just want to correct you, Brett. Laura's my assistant. Janet's my wife.
I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries.
Sorry.
I just didn't want it to keep going on, right?
I appreciate you correcting me because I've had people call me the wrong name for an entire podcast and no one jumped in. So thank you. What I was saying was, when I wasn't getting any fiber, I was literally just eating, fatty red meat, chicken thighs, eggs, fish, a little bit of cheese here and there. Was not getting any fiber in at all. My stomach felt amazing, was having like normal bowel movements. And I could just feel the inflammation going down seemingly like every day and every week, which is fantastic. And now I'm at a point where I'm definitely not strict carnivore right now. I use it more as a sporadic tool. Like my wife enjoys eating animal protein and cooking vegetables and some carbohydrates and things like that. And I feel like I've gotten to a point where I can tolerate those things really well. There definitely are like certain leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables and tomatoes and things like that definitely can cause a little bit of inflammation. And if I do feel that, I feel like I have enough intuition where I can cut those things out and really like navigate around the foods that feel best for me. But I guess my goal is ultimately to use the diet as a tool to then be able to work back some of these other things into my diet personally. So I don't think my experience was that I didn't think that fiber was essential, and now I'm eating it and can tolerate it. But if I ever start to go off track, that's when I'm really just removing everything and just relying on the animal products and the bone broth and things like that. And it gets me right where I need to be. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does.
That's a great answer. And one thing I want to say, Brett, is thank you for being honest. Some of the diet culture out there has become a religion, whether it be keto or whether it be some carnivore. And they're like, this is the only way to eat. And that's it. And, that's what I appreciate about guys like you and Shawn Baker's. You guys understand that we really are created as omnivores. But most people will probably do better on a mostly carnivore diet like our ancestors have done for thousands of years. And I agree with you when it comes to fiber. Fiber is not essential. And when I think about ulcerative colitis, when I just think about that disease physically, tell me how something that is non-digestible is going to help that disease. To me, it just seems very irritating. Whereas if you're eating pure animal protein and fat, it's not going to irritate the inner lining of the gut, which is the problem with ulcerative colitis. So the
Yes.
whole fiber thing with ulcerative colitis never, ever made sense to me.
Yeah, I know. I remember, I think I remember getting like a playbook that I think the hospital printed out and gave to me. And it was like, these gut friendly foods like, toast and white rice and bananas and things like that. I'm like, I think those things are actually fairly irritating. Like I wish I was sipping bone broth or something like that. That was just very easily digestible and nourishing for the guts. And, you're getting all those collagenous parts of the cow in there too. But I feel like that would be the ultimate goal is imagine there's you're starting to see a lot more doctors that for type 2 diabetics, like we were talking about, that are starting to advocate for low carbohydrate diets. Imagine if we can get to a world where it's somewhat normal for people that are inflamed or have Crohn's, colitis, et cetera, where their, low carbohydrate or carnivore protocol is actually the norm when they're sick and inflamed. That would be incredible. And I think it's possible the more people that actually share their stories and like we're actually welcoming to some of this anecdotal feedback versus just running towards a peer-reviewed study for everything.
Right.
So earlier in the podcast, Harry talked a little bit about regenerative farming. And when we were at Hack Your Health, there was a few people talking about it. It's interesting because I come from a really rural area. My parents farmed and ranched. And my dad, I remember saying as I got older, saying all these chemicals are going to kill us. Like he was just, as it started moving forward and you had more sprays and all these things different happening, our food supply really is toxic. So we need to kind of talk about that. So what are you seeing changing out there, Harry, on the forefront, and how are we getting a handle on our food supply?
Yeah, I think it's been really exciting for Brett and I to see. We started the podcast 3 years ago, and at the time there were people talking about regenerative farming, but it was still, I think, it wasn't a topic that people like, Robert Kennedy Jr. were campaigning around in terms of how, he was viewing making an impact in the government. And like, this is now like a topic that the highest level leaders in our country are talking about. They just approved $700 million worth of grants for regenerative farming in the U.S. Like that is such a great sign. And, I hope that there's a really positive impact from that. So when you think about regenerative farming versus the alternative is really the industrial food model, which I think for the most part, it takes this system that's really designed to be a closed loop system as God intended, where you have all these different actors contributing to creating food that are all from the same place. So you have cattle and the soil and the chickens and the turkeys and everything that comes together, the worms in the ground, all coming together to create better quality soil, and the things in the ground, the grasses create higher nutrient value things that come, grow from that soil. And then the animals that live on that eat that grass and are healthier because they're eating higher quality, more nutrient dense foods. And then you have the alternative model, which has become the popular way to do things, which is, every step of that process is highly controlled and highly isolated by chemicals and industrial processes that we're leveraging technology to create food, but we're also in the process killing the soil microbiome and ultimately depleting the soil of the nutrients that those plants and animals are eating. And so I think what we've seen, there's so many stories of people that we've had on the podcast where they're restoring organic matter in the soil in the form, from 1% to 6, 7, 8, 9%. And then they'll do muscle testing on their bison or their cattle that live on that land from year 0 to year 5. And you'll see that the muscle tissue actually has more of the micronutrients that you're looking for. We had Joel Salatin on the podcast. He was talking about how his eggs have 150% more riboflavin and all the other choline, all the other micronutrients that come from raising these chickens the right way. So I think regenerative farming is this call back to these closed loop, a more highly skilled way of farming. We're not relying on essentially like farming pharmaceuticals. Like I think that these chemicals that we're putting in our body in the form of medicine, that the type of stuff that Brett's taking, A lot of them are like petroleum-based byproducts, and we're doing that same thing in the soil to grow food. But what we realize is that we're actually like nuking the soil of the nutrient value. And that's, I think the interesting thing with that is when I started getting interested in this stuff, I was reading Will Harris's blogs on regenerative farming, and I was starting to order my food from him. And one of the things that he would talk about is all the different life cycles and all the different cycles that exist within the environment that he's stewarding. So he's talking about the mycelium cycle. He's talking about the water cycle. He's talking about all these natural orders that exist. And what happens when we start to intercede in a negative way with these chemicals is if we are using NPK-based fertilizers and slowly draining the soil of all their nutrients, we're massively disrupting the water cycle. Soil can no longer hold the same amount of water that it once used to be able to hold. Then there's massive amounts of runoff, and we just have this cascading effect of depleting the soil quality and in the environments that we're supposed to be stewarding. So I really hope that the collective consciousness around health sees this big picture in its totality, because they're not mutually exclusive. I think that when we're talking about pharmaceutical drugs that are, Brett's taking to heal his ulcerative colitis, which some of these are amazing breakthroughs in the world of medicine and drugs, and they're very impressive. But in its totality, I think that we are starting to like circumnavigate nature, and we're seeing all the negative health effects that come from that. So I think these problems with the soil and with our health are all very much interconnected.
For sure. And I don't think there's ever been a better time. It's just a perfect storm, if you will, with things like you're talking about, our government talking about it, and just individuals from the bottom up talking about health and food and nutrition and how pharmaceuticals aren't the answer. I never thought in my 30 plus years in pharmacy I would ever see that day. We've been preaching this stuff we've been questioning the industry for, the pharmaceutical industry for at least 2 decades now. Mm-hmm. And I never thought I would see this day. And it's actually a positive thing.
Yeah, it's almost like 2 decades ago when you both probably felt like you were on an island. It took time for us to really catch up. And we're naturally observant creatures, and I think when we kind of get out of our bubbles, like Hack Your Health or your community where you guys are, where we are in Austin, and you go to a place like an airport where it's just like this general melting pot of people, you hear the statistic that 70% of Americans are overweight or obese, or 60+% of deaths come from chronic disease, and 63% of calories come in the form of ultra processed food in the US. You really see the embodiment of that in an airport. And, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but it's like, it's 7 out of 10 people. It's like you kind of do the math on your finger when you're counting around. And so my point in saying that, Shawn and Janet, is that I think people they're smart, they're aware, they look around and they realize, wow, almost everyone around me is not healthy. This is not normal. I remember 30, 40 years ago, people were trim, or you see those famous pictures of, hey, Venice Beach back in 1981, and everyone just looks fit and trim, not overly bulky, but just like in good natural health. Right. So what has happened in between that time period? And you guys have really been trailblazers doing that. Now I think everyone else is starting to catch up.
I remember Elvis as a child, and my mom thought he was, this handsome man. And I'm like, Mom, he's fat. Elvis would look.
And you look back
healthy,
at Elvis in 1977, right? About before he died. You look now and he's like, oh, he wasn't fat. But in 1977, you looked at it and it's like, that guy's fat.
Right. But our perspective, like you said, has changed. And so I guess where the journey, Shawn and I had our own health journey with our own selves and our children. Our youngest son was way overweight from very early age. And the way it had to change was we had to change our lifestyle.
We had to change our lifestyle.
As parents, we had to change. So, I'm not judging people, but one of the things that both of you talked about that I think made a big difference for our family was we changed what we were putting in our mouth. Like we didn't bring home the packages of cereal or the packages of Oreos or all the stuff that is just concentrated. And, it's not just even the processed sugars, it's all those chemicals that are being smashed in there, like the glyphosates and all those other things that came from the farming. And it's toxic, right? And the only way you start feeling better is by changing. Like I have a journey in my family where colon cancer is rampant. Well, the only way to change that, and I feel like for myself, is changing again what we're consuming and how. And the point about the farming and how we are changing that is, I think we have to go back in time and look at what our ancestors did, especially the ones that were very successful about it. So the journey of healing your skin or healing your gut or healing that, I'm hopeful now that we have more people on the platform sharing their stories. I'm hopeful because before, like you said, we were kind of an island to ourselves, but
Yes.
you don't know what you don't know if you've never, stepped out of it. So in my opinion, the biggest epidemic in our country today is obesity by far.
Oh.
And it's hitting our children at rampant rates. I mean, if the only food they're getting is through a drive-through or what they're eating at school, we're setting them up for huge failure. And we were talking about a big pandemic. I mean, to me, heart disease and all these other chronic diseases is really what's killing us.
Yeah, I mean, you think about what happens to your overall energy and vitality, and even just your perception of life I've had periods where, my health hasn't been the greatest, and, you're carrying an extra 10, 15, 20 pounds, and just, how that impacts your day-to-day life. And, I'm very hopeful for the future of our country, but I think it's going to come on the back of us understanding like what food actually really is again, and getting closer to the source, cutting out, a lot of these chains within the food system. How many pieces of, or how many people touch your food before it hits your plate is probably a decent metric for eating healthier food. And, I'm hopeful because I think that, on the other side of making some of these small changes, losing 5-10 pounds can really lead to you taking control of a lot of areas within your life, better relationships, more energy to go do things that you've been wanting to do your whole life. And I think like that's kind of the essence of health, is not just to obsess over your health, but to actually utilize it to go, serve in a greater capacity, and just be of value and useful for other people.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, Harry, is that health is wealth. The healthier you are, the more productive you can be. So however you define wealth, you can define it financially, or you define it by how much time you can spend with your kids. Health is wealth. Without good health, you got none of that. You got nothing. And, you say an extra 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds. Imagine, let's face it, imagine an extra 50 to 100 pounds, which is what most Americans are carrying around. That is, disastrous and deadly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, especially, you pick up a 20-pound dumbbell, you realize how heavy that is, and you think about a 50 to 100-pound dumbbell. It's like it's literally two different humans.
Yeah,
you that loses that weight versus the version of you that keeps that weight on ultimately.
So, Harry, I want to go back to cattle, since we live in a rural agriculture community. Ag is our industry here. And one of the things that is so cool to see is, after harvest, a lot of the cornfields they're not plowed under yet. And the other day we were driving through south of us, and we're like, what is that? And we see a bunch of cattle, and it looked like a pumpkin patch. So here's this pumpkin patch that has been harvested for what they could harvest out of it. And now they've got cattle roaming in this field to eat it. It's just crazy. You see cattle in places you would never ever believe that they could sustain themselves. You'll have a field that is like mostly rocks and scrub brush, scrub land, scab land. It's not farmable even. Yet there are cattle out there eating the cheat grass, eating the grass. It's unbelievable. And you look in a field of a quarter section, so 160 acres, 125 acres if it's a irrigated circle, and you see 100 head of cattle out there plus that are sustaining themselves in 100 acres. Think about how many people that could feed. Yet think about in that 100 acres, if it was wheat, how many people could that feed? So anyway, go. There's a lot there, I know.
Well, Brett and I have had the great fortune of interviewing some incredible people on the podcast, and two of which are Joel Salatin and Will Harris. I've mentioned them both previously. And like just one of the things that comes to mind as you're speaking is just the beautiful way that cows can upcycle nutrients from, taking, what would otherwise just be a field that is, that matter is just going to die and decay into the soil, but they can come along, eat it, turn it into muscle tissue for themselves, and then they go to the bathroom on the soil, and that replenishes the soil with nutrients that the soil needs to create the next harvest and the next season of growing. And so like cows and ruminants in general are just like these incredible nutrient movers. And they're also just incredibly nutrient dense themselves. So like this idea that we're able to fill in these different pockets of the system, and like America's grasslands used to be covered with bison and oxen that were just doing this naturally. So yeah, they're amazing animals. And you're not going to find a more nutrient dense animal than the ruminants.
No. And it's actually, it's crazy because it can't be explained by science. They eat grass, and they actually, it disobeys the law of physics, but they actually turn their muscle. They eat less calories in theory. Now, obviously there's some kind of calculation we're missing, but they eat less calories and can turn it into more calories that is concentrated than they took in. So obviously our calculation is erroneous, but that's the whole point. There's just so many things that on earth that we can't make fake fertilizer. I mean, seriously, do you really think we can try to make fertilizer like cows? I mean, ruminants or the animals in general have nitrogenous waste, and cows are perfect at using that nitrogenic waste to fertilize plants. I mean, what a beautiful thing we have. And I'm happy to see that. Of course, I'm in an agriculture community, so I don't know what it's like in a big city. I would probably be not very happy about it, but I think it's nice to see that these farmers are grazing their land after they harvested their cornfield. They're not plowing their wheat field under. They're actually grazing it. And not only is it better for their land, but I'm sure if I was a farmer, I would probably give that rancher, I'd probably let him put his cows on my field for free. I mean, because it's a beautiful idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shawn, I think to your point too, you'd mentioned that there's certain things that can't be explained by science. I think that's been helpful to us understanding regenerative agriculture and just our health in general. Like maybe we don't need a scientific rule for everything. Maybe there's just certain things that come from the Lord that are unexplainable by science, and that's perfectly okay. And I think to your point too, like sounds like you guys were out in this pasture, you saw the 100 cattle, and you just blanket know that that's good for the community, and you're thinking about the thousands of people that those cows can ultimately feed with the most nutrient dense food possible. I think most people are just used to living in a vacuum, or they're living in, areas that are a bit too urban, or they've never made the effort to actually go out to a farm or, shake a rancher's hand. I think the stat is that 99% of all Americans have never met their farmer before. There's just something about seeing the farm with your own eyes, getting to meet that person that's growing your food, walking the soil, seeing the animals, how well they're taken care of, even like seeing the processing facility. And you just realize like, not only is this not detrimental to the environment, it's like literally it's crucial to our flourishing as humans in our society in general. But I don't think enough. I think too many of us are just seeing these these 30-second clips circulated on social media, or seeing the snippets of a news headline and just blanket assuming that, beef is terrible for you, it's bad for the environment, I can't eat it, but I'm totally okay eating, Doritos and drinking 4 beers at the work happy hour, right? I'm sure you see that.
Right. I mean, seriously, make that make sense.
I will say this, though, from my background, that I know there's a time and place where animals do need to be in a feedlot, maybe surely. However, that in my mind, that was not something I ever grew up with as my dad ranching. Our cows roamed. They were never living their whole entire life in, square footage on top of each other in their own feces forever. I think that is disgusting in my brain. So those things that get put out there, and it happens. I mean, there's huge feedlots that, that does happen. And for a short period of time, I understand that before they're going to be butchered or something. But the existence of that animal to me that's inhumane. I see this with dairies too. When they're standing in piles of crap, I think that's disgusting. So we do have extremes in farming still. That is not the same as in regenerate, right? That's not the same thing. We can produce a lot of chickens and a lot of beef and a lot of things in small spaces, but even when we were looking at cage free and what the definition of cage free is like, the only time I remember the chickens is at night they went in the chicken coop so they could live longer, right? Like, so you didn't have it totally ate. Like
so the fox didn't eat them.
Yeah, the birds, but whatever. It wasn't, their life was not stuck, right? So I do think there is, a big difference to be painted, because I don't know if a lot of people understand the difference. Like you said, they just have not been exposed or educated, but there's a big difference between the people you're interviewing, Harry and Brett, on your show, about how they are treating their animals and how they're treating their soil. There's a huge difference between the huge agricultural industry versus what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. The regenerative model probably makes up less than 1% of the food that's actually on the shelves at a grocery store from a humanitarian standpoint. And I mean, you could choose a number of different lenses to talk about the feedlot environment, and it's not healthy for the cows. Like, they're putting on most of their weight and their fat in that last 3-month window. And if you know anything about the biology of the cattle or people, a lot of the toxins get stored in the fat. And so these cows are putting on a lot of fat, and they're stressed, and they're, not eating their normal species appropriate diet when they're in those feedlots. And then they're not moving as much as they usually do. And they're, standing on their own, feces. Like, it's really not a healthy environment for them to, even if it's just a short window, it's that last window where they're putting on most of their weight. And so it's just a way to get food on the plates faster, which, we're holding all these problems in balance. Like, feeding a lot of people is a difficult thing. Feeding a lot of people at a low cost is a difficult thing. But if we're looking at like the ideal way to raise our food, it's definitely happy animals out on pasture doing things that are minimally invasive for these animals, so that at the end of the day, they just have one bad day. And we're able to use them for their highest and best use once that time comes. And the regenerative model is really like one of our mentors in the space is Taylor Collins, who started Rome Ranch. It's a bison ranch here in Texas. And he just says, we want all of our animals to live as if they were just free in nature. And then they have one bad last day. They have one bad day, and that's it. So, that's really, I think, the big difference with regenerative is just trying to do everything with that conscious awareness of, if we're going to be eating these animals for food, we want to do it in a way that honors the animal and honors the life of that animal.
Well, and you talk about that one bad day, and I don't know, have you guys followed Eli Girard? Doctor, he's a doctor.
No.
You guys should probably have him on your podcast. Great guy, nephrologist, intensivist. about 5 years ago says, I just can't do this anymore. And he basically, he started doing his own thing, educating people, kind of like Sean Baker. And, he talks a lot about, mostly a carnivore diet. And, one thing he said, and this is true, it's like, well, and Harry, to your point, so, when we slaughter the animal, yeah, they had that one bad day. But let's remember this, those bison that lived 200 years ago, they would have a bad day also. Either a human killed them in a different manner, maybe, with a spear, maybe a rifle, or a wolf ate them. I mean, let's just be honest.
Exactly.
Eventually, every animal ends up as food. That's just facts. Even as humans, when you look at us in the decompensation process, whether it be bacteria, whether it be funguses that thrive on our bodies, our decaying bodies, that's just a fact. All animals end up as food. So to say that it's not humane to kill an animal, the reality of it is, in the regenerative cycle, we all end up as food.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's kind of a dark note.
I mean, it is dark, but I'm just
But
saying. It's true.
Biologically, yes.
Right.
If we're looking at the cycle of life, I mean, we need all the organisms too. Or like when we're talking about, you talked about the soil, and I mean, it all plays around that, and other ecosystems are there. So whether you're talking about birds eating the worms out of the ground or the insects that are coming along, it all plays together. And these animals really play a big part of it. But then again, I think too, as we are healing, the point that you made about the animals sitting in that toxic environment, bringing that into their fat, that's a huge point, because that's where we're trapping chemicals. And even for ourselves, if we are carrying extra weight, we are trapping chemicals in our fat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've had some friends that we respect to speak about, if they're going to get the cheaper kind of budgetary cuts at the grocery store from a budget standpoint, they're consciously making the effort to cut those pieces of fat off, Janet, to not necessarily inherit those toxins, but still eat some meat that's actually like budget effective. So that's something that we recommend for people too, where, they might not necessarily have the budget right now to be able to afford some of those pricier regenerative cuts. There are certain workarounds from a grocery store standpoint. And even for me, we've always just tried to just take the pressure off of people where, when I was starting to heal, I was probably buying like some of the cheaper feedlot cuts of meat, definitely not the highest quality I could have been getting, but the alternative to what I was eating was way better. And then I kind of worked myself up to that process where, okay, great. Now I have this, relationship with this grass finished regenerative rancher. I know who that person is. That's who I'm sourcing my food from. And I'm paying a little bit more, but I also think it's way more cost effective because all of the stuff that I was buying in my shopping cart was not essential for me to be eating at all. And it was actually quite deleterious to my health. So not to get too long-winded, but I do agree with you on the fat piece and the storage piece, and that being a massive negative side effect of that industrial feedlot model that our food system is unfortunately propped up by right now.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your comment about, don't make it too difficult at first. There's some people that, they say, oh, it's got to be regenerative, it's got to be grass-fed beef, all this kind of stuff. You know what? If we tell people that, they just won't do it. It's kind of like, when somebody comes out with a, they want to start exercising and they're doing nothing now besides sitting on the couch. And they want to know how many reps and how many movements they should do in the gym and what exercise and all that. It's like, you know what? I mean, don't make it difficult. You're doing nothing now. So just walk 10 minutes a day. Seriously, start with that. Yeah. You don't want to make it too difficult or they won't do it. It'll create a barrier to entry and they just won't do it. So, and I think too, like we buy from a local rancher and I don't think they wouldn't define themselves as regenerative. I don't know if they would or not, but they're definitely not in the store. And so I think one of the ways that people can access good meat is, like you say, meet a rancher in the first place. So go locally, buy locally.
See what they're doing. I mean,
and talk to them and ask them what they're doing. I mean, you know, we love our beef. We buy a full beef about every 4 months. And, you know, and to your point about being more expensive, I've done the math before. It's been a few years since I've done the math. It's probably not more expensive. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, especially considering your overall price per pound and you're getting hamburger and ribeye, it's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, especially when I mean, once you start like pulling different levers with the decisions that you're making around food, like, I mean, if you're buying a whole cow, like how many fewer times are you eating out on
Right.
meals that are 2-3x what they would normally cost? I mean, it's expensive to not cook at home. And if you're going to be cooking at home, making that investment in the highest quality food, I think ultimately is very much worth it. And, you know, some of those changes that you might see, they might materialize over a long period of time, especially in regards to like the micronutrients. Like, I think a lot of people, it just like really depends on where you're starting from. But yeah, I think like if you're buying a whole cow from somebody, like, I think you're ultimately going to be saving a good amount of money over the long haul.
Yeah. So I know we got to wrap this podcast up. We could talk forever about this. I have a passion for this.
Yes.
Thank you guys for being on today. But I want to mention something. I want to see if you guys have ever noticed this with some of the ranchers you guys have talked to. So living in the agriculture community, we get to see this firsthand when we're driving down the highway. And just back on how good ruminants are for the soil. So we were driving down the highway, and one side of the highway, it is not grazed. I don't know if it's a different owner, if it's public land, not private land. I don't know. And on the other side of the highway, it was grazed. And it's basically open grassland, not really farmable because it's just too rocky of soil. One side has cattle, one side doesn't have cattle. The side without cattle is full of weeds. I mean, Russian thistle, kochia, all kinds of weeds. The side with cattle, there's no weeds. It's just grass, which means you don't need to spray a bunch of chemicals on it to kill all those weeds. You just put cows on it and they take care of it. It is unbelievable the way it works.
Yeah, cows and goats are pretty solid, and sheep are great. They're great lawnmowers.
Yeah, right.
But
they definitely are.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, from the standpoint of just managing your property, it seems like having a few of those animals around, it can, I mean, it can take care of a lot of the burden of just the general upkeep. So if that farm is just dormant and not actually doing anything, I wonder if that farmer across the street has ever thought about just sending his herd over there.
Right. Sure, I'll help you out.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have to have these discussions. So because you know,
Yes.
People need to know those things and just get it open. So
Totally.
So as we wrap this podcast up, you guys, I want to know what you guys have a passion for. What do you have a passion for?
I have a lot of passions. I would say the thing I'm most passionate about is just helping the younger generation. You know, people who are 10 years, 5-10 years younger than me. I feel like we're living through a period where young men don't necessarily feel like they have a purpose. And I love being able to speak truth into the lives of people who are, younger and shaping the future. And I think that we live in an incredible world, and there's obviously a lot of bad things going on and things that we want changed. But I believe that like the future generation is the center of how that change will come to be. So I'm very passionate about the spirit of the future generation.
I love it. How about you, Brett?
Yeah, I think both Harry and I, we genuinely feel incredibly blessed to do what we do, and we really love what we do too. Like outside of conversations like this, we really put a lot of time and focus into building our supplement company, Noble, which is a grass-fed beef protein powder. But everything that we were talking about on this show, changing our nutrition, experimenting with workout styles, doing research on regenerative agriculture, it all culminated in this incredible thing where it really gave both of us the confidence to be able to stop what we were doing, like working the conventional jobs we were working, and really go out and chase what we felt to be our mission and build this brand from scratch. And so I think that's what gets Harry and I really excited is you think about, some of these younger people, or you take your son, for example, that lost a bunch of weight, how different the trajectory of their lives are just by making some of these changes and taking dominion over the food that goes into your mouth. Like, I think there's just so much content on social media where people are just trying to go viral and say the craziest thing and everything is toxic and trying to kill you. And then there's this more like this true side of it where it's like, imagine if you took control over the bite of food that goes into your body, what that could ultimately compound into, the weight loss, the confidence, what that could manifest into. And that's really what we feel like, where had I not gotten my health in order, I don't know where I would be. I would definitely still be dependent on these drugs, staying in my corporate job because I couldn't get off the healthcare insurance. Yeah. But instead we're here talking to amazing people like you, learning, building our supplement brand. And, we feel like that future is probably possible for a lot more people than they realize. And it could literally start with, with your fork and the food that you're putting into your body, and just taking dominion over that and treating yourself like you matter.
So much to unpack there. I got to make a comment about the health insurance, the employer-sponsored health insurance. By the way, Brett, that's by design. So employer pays for the health insurance. You get sick. You can't leave your job. I know so many people that cannot leave their job because they have this wonderful health insurance. And it's slavery. It is literally modern day slavery, all by design. The pharmaceutical companies, they collude with insurance companies. The insurance companies collude with employers to talk about what a good plan they have. And then they all collude with the medical system to basically rip off consumers.
That is such an interesting way to look at it as like modern day slavery, where you probably see so many people where they would really they would prefer to be doing many other things outside of the job that they're in. But the fear of leaving that and losing access to these drugs because they're so expensive is so crippling that, they spend decades working this job that probably like decays who they are as a person. And it's sad. I know a girl who has ulcerative colitis, and she really wanted to quit her job to do something entrepreneurial. And same exact issue, Shawn. And I was trying to teach her about the carnivore diet, but I could never get her to jumpstart it. And I was just saying to her, I was like, what if this is the catalyst for you to actually get your gut health in order, where you don't need to take Remicade anymore, and then you could actually do something entrepreneurial and just live your life and ultimately live out your dreams. But there's just this fear machine that's just propagated so widely.
Yep. So Harry, tell us about your guys' podcast.
Yeah, so we started the Meat Mafia podcast 3 years ago, March of 2022. And the premise of it when we first started was really to get in touch with free-thinking people who are thinking about health and health autonomy differently. So we would talk to doctors, farmers, ranchers, founders of businesses who are thinking, elevating their thinking around like, our current system is broken. Let's just look at the outputs of what the current healthcare system looks like. 88% of people being metabolically unhealthy. So if we're disagreeing that system's broken, what do we need to do to fix this system? And so over the course of the next 3 years, we've had a ton of great conversations with a lot of very interesting contrarian thinkers in the health and wellness space. We interviewed Callie Means when he was first starting to make a name for himself. Dr. Marty McCary, who's now running the FDA. We've had a lot of incredible farmers and doctors on the show. And the show now, I think Brett and I, since we launched Noble, we've started having a lot more entrepreneurs on in this space. So it's been really fun just hearing how the private sector within the healthcare industry is thinking about approaching some of these problems. So a lot of people who have created really good products, a lot of people who have, take for instance, like Crowd Health. We've had Andy Schoonover on the podcast several times. He's talked about, talking about insurance. He's created a crowdsourcing way to fund healthcare costs and basically reducing the burden of healthcare costs, because a lot of these doctors will take cash advances. If you pay in cash, the bills will be about like 50 to 60% less. So their model is you settle in cash, and then the crowdsourcing ends up funding you on the back end and actually helping you pay for those bills. So just super interesting people who are doing all sorts of things within the health industry. So if you're interested in kind of the disruptive nature of what's happening in the healthcare industry, we'd love for you guys to give us a listen and check out the Meat Mafia podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are doing great things. And I will say we've had multiple episodes on how to save money in healthcare by paying cash and using something like a health share, which is like a crowd health. So it's the only way to go. I think traditional insurance is a complete scam and a ripoff. I wrote a book about the subject too. So, well, thank you guys for being on. We really appreciate it. It's an honor and a privilege to have you guys on. You've helped us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So Brett and Harry, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Such a good conversation, and just appreciate all the work you're both doing.
Yes. And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Monday to our regularly scheduled podcast, 12:03 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.